Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe and turn on notifications. He began the story with the detached precision of a sociologist, describing a case study. Adam Cole never considered himself an emotional man. At 35, a tenured professor at Portland State University, he saw the world as a series of systems, patterns, and predictable human behaviors. His own life, he believed, was a testament to that order. His marriage to Sophie was the centerpiece of this belief. For 6 years, he said, his voice even betraying nothing, we had what I would call a well-constructed partnership. He explained their routine with an almost academic fondness. He would wake at 6, the Oregon morning still gray and damp, make coffee, and review lecture notes on urban decay theory. Sophie, his wife, who was 33, would still be asleep. Her work as a physical therapist at OHSU didn't start until later in the morning. Their schedules were like 2 gears in a finely tuned clock, turning independently, but in perfect sync. He left early, she woke late. They met for dinner, exchanged summaries of their days. His about challenging students, hers about patients recovering from surgery, and then settled onto the sofa in their Pearl District condo. There was a comfortable silence between them, filled by the glow of a television screen. He had always told himself that this predictability was its own form of happiness. It was stable. It was secure. Anything else was just chaos. He admired her work, he insisted. He described Sophie's dedication as a calling, the way she could handle the physical and emotional pain of others with a steady, compassionate hand. But about 3 months ago, a new variable had been introduced into their routine. That variable was her Aunt Carol. According to the narrative Sophie provided, Aunt Carol, her mother's older sister, living alone in a small house in the Selwood neighborhood, had taken a bad fall, a failing hip. She needed help. Groceries, trips to the doctor, simple chores around the house that were now impossible for her. Sophie, naturally, had stepped in. She started visiting her 2 or 3 times a week, Adam recounted, always on afternoons when she had a lighter patient load. He never questioned it. He remembered Aunt Carol as a kind, bustling woman who had served them lukewarm tea and dry biscuits during the handful of holidays they had visited. Helping family was a noble act. It fit perfectly within the framework of the good, compassionate person he knew Sophie to be. The story was consistent. It made sense. But on that Thursday, the entire structure collapsed. He was on campus, preparing for his 2 o'clock seminar, when an email from the department head arrived. A minor plumbing emergency in the building. All afternoon classes were cancelled. He felt a brief spark of liberation. He could stay, get ahead on grading mid-terms. But a different idea took hold. Arare, spontaneous impulse. He would go home and cook. He'd make that risotto Sophie loved, the one that took an hour of constant stirring. He'd surprise her. He drove his sedan back through the persistent Portland drizzle, parked in the underground garage of their building, and took the elevator up. It was just before 3. As he stepped into the lobby, Mr. Henderson, the building's ever-present concierge, gave him a friendly wave. He was a man in his 50s with a kind face and an unnerving memory for the residents' comings and goings. Professor Cole, cutting out early today? Henderson asked with a smile. Adam smiled back, feeling the pleasant anticipation of his surprise dinner. They had to shut the water off in my building. Thought I'd take advantage of a free afternoon. Henderson nodded, his eyes crinkling. Then, with the casual, offhand tone of a man making small talk, he dropped the sentence that would detonate Adam's world. Good on you. Saw your wife head out with that fellow in the gray sedan again, just a little while ago. He must be a relative, right? Always seems to pick her up on the same days. Adam felt the smile freeze on his face. The muscles in his jaw locked. He could feel the blood draining from his head. A cold, sickening plunge. What fellow? He managed to ask. His own voice, sounding distant and strange. Sensing the shift in tone, Henderson hesitated. Oh, you know. The tall fellow, dark hair, always in that clean gray sedan. I just figured he was a cousin or something, helping her out with her sick aunt. Adam forced a nod. That felt like a betrayal of his own body. Oh, right. Of course. Him. He thanked Henderson and walked toward the elevator. His mind. A maelstrom. Every word echoed. Amplified. Again. That fellow. Same days. Sophie had always said she drove herself. She had always said she went alone. Always. The elevator doors slid shut, encasing him in a small, silent box, and the first hairline crack appeared. In the foundation of everything he believed to be true. He stepped into the apartment and locked the door behind him. The silence, usually a comforting blanket, now felt suffocating, heavy with unspoken questions. He dropped his briefcase on the sofa and stood motionless in the center of the living room, the city's gray light filtering through the large windows. His analytical mind, the tool he used to deconstruct societal patterns, turned inward, frantically trying to assemble the pieces. Maybe Henderson was mistaken. He was an old man. Maybe he confused Sophie with another resident. That had to be it. Or maybe this fellow was a distant cousin, someone Sophie hadn't thought to mention. A new friend from a book club? He grasped at logical, innocent explanations. But they felt thin. Like paper shields against a coming storm. The word again was the problem. It implied a pattern, a routine. And the phrase same days solidified it. This wasn't random. This was planned. His gaze fell on his phone, lying on the coffee table. He picked it up. Years ago, after their car had been broken into, they had installed a simple GPS tracker, mostly as an anti-theft measure. He had never once used it to check on her. He had never felt the need. The thought of it had felt invasive. A sign of mistrust in a partnership he believed was built on transparency. Now, his hands trembled slightly as he opened the application. He navigated to the root history, his heart pounding a dull, uneven rhythm against his ribs. He set the date range. For the past 3 months. What he saw on the screen made him sink heavily onto the sofa. There were no trips to Selwood. Not a single one. Instead, the map was littered with dozens of data points, all clustered around a single address in Lake Oswego, a wealthy suburb across the Willamette River. The trips occurred like clockwork. 2 or 3 times a week, always on a Tuesday or Thursday afternoon, always between the hours of 2 and 6. A quiet, tree-lined street he had never even heard of. Why was she going there? Why had she constructed such an elaborate lie? He felt a wave of nausea. He needed one final piece of data, one last control variable, to test his horrifying hypothesis. With shaking fingers, he picked up the landline and dialed Aunt Carol's number. Each ring felt like an eternity, a shrill countdown to the end of his world. Finally, a cheerful, elderly voice answered. "Hello? Aunt Carol, it's Adam. Sophie's husband." "Adam. What a lovely surprise, dear. How are you?" He closed his eyes, forcing his voice to remain steady. "I'm well, thank you. I was just calling to see how you were doing. Sophie mentioned you've needed some help around the house lately." There was a pause. "Help? Oh, no, dear. My hip is acting up a bit, but I have my lovely neighbor who helps with the bins. I'm managing just fine." "Why do you ask?" The ground beneath him began to crumble. "It's just. Sophie said she's been coming by to help you." Another pause. This one longer. Heavier. "Sophie?" Aunt Carol's voice was filled with genuine confusion. "Oh, heavens, no, dear. I haven't seen Sophie in months. Not since Christmas, I don't think. Is she all right? Did something happen?" He felt the last vestiges of his reality shatter into a million pieces. He mumbled an excuse. Something about a misunderstanding, wished her well, and hung up the phone. He sat there, staring at the receiver in his hand, the cheerful dial tone buzzing in the silent apartment. She had lied. Not once, as a panicked mistake, but repeatedly. Systematically. For 3 months. She wasn't caring for a sick aunt. She was going to Lake Oswego. And she wasn't going alone. The first emotion was a hot, suffocating anger that rose from his chest into his throat. It was followed swiftly by humiliation. A chilling realization that he, the man who saw patterns others missed, had been made a fool. He had been living in a carefully constructed fiction. and he had never once thought to question the author. In the hours that followed, the initial shock and anger did not curdle into despair. Instead, they crystallized into something cold, hard, and sharp. Adam Cole, the professor, took over. He realized that this was no longer a personal crisis to be weathered with tears and accusations. This was a problem to be analyzed, documented, and solved with absolute precision. Emotion was a liability. Action was the only path forward. He didn't hesitate. He opened his laptop, the same one he used to write lectures on social structures, and searched for Private Investigator Portland. He found a firm with discreet, professional reviews, and dialed the number immediately. A calm, businesslike woman answered, and transferred him to an investigator named Marcus. Adam explained the situation without a tremor in his voice. He laid out the facts as he knew them. His wife's fabricated alibi, the address in Lake Oswego, the consistent schedule, the mention of a tall fellow with dark hair. He needed proof. He needed evidence. Marcus listened in silence, then spoke in a low, calm voice. I understand. I'll need 4 business days to gather a comprehensive file. Photos, video surveillance, and an identification of the person involved. I can start this afternoon, but the full report won't be ready until next Tuesday. 4 days. It felt like a lifetime. 4 more days of sharing a bed with a stranger. 4 more days of listening to lies. But he knew acting rashly would be a mistake. A premature confrontation would give her the chance to twist the narrative, to gaslight him, to paint him as paranoid. He needed irrefutable data. Fine, he said, go ahead. Those 4 days were the longest of his life. He moved through his routine on autopilot, a ghost in his own skin. He taught his classes, graded papers, and exchanged pleasantries with colleagues, all while a cold fire burned in his gut. At night, he would sit across the dinner table from Sophie. She would come home, wearing that gentle, tired smile of someone who had spent the afternoon doing something meaningful. How was your Aunt Carol today? He asked on Friday evening, his voice a carefully controlled instrument. Oh, she was in good spirits, Sophie replied, looking him directly in the eye. We managed to get her cupboards reorganized. She was so grateful. He watched her. Every micro-expression, every gesture. She lied with a disturbing, effortless grace. There was no flicker of guilt in her eyes, no hesitation in her voice. It was a perfect performance. And with every lie, the love he once felt for her was being systematically erased, replaced by a cold, desolate clarity. He felt a sharp pang of sorrow not for the loss of her, but for the loss of the man he had been. The man who was naive enough to believe in her. On the following Tuesday, precisely at 2 p.m., the email arrived. He was in his campus office, the door locked. The subject line was stark. Complete report, Sophie Cole. His hands were slick with sweat as he clicked it open. The email contained several attachments. A 3-page written report, a folder of high-resolution photographs, and 2 short video files. He opened the first photo. The air left his lungs. In a single, silent gasp. It was Sophie, stepping out of their car, in front of a modern, expensive-looking house in Lake Oswego. Beside her, laughing, was a tall man with neatly trimmed dark hair. He was wearing scrubs. Her hand was resting on his arm, with an easy familiarity that made Adam's stomach clench. He clicked through the photos. A sequence of them entering the house together. Photos of them leaving 4 hours later, wearing different, more casual clothes. In one, the man's arm was draped around her shoulder. The timestamps on each photo were like nails being hammered into a coffin. He opened the first video file. It was only a few seconds long, filmed through the car's windshield. The man leaned over and kissed her. A deep, lingering kiss. Sophie returned it, her hand moving to the back of his neck, pulling him closer. Adam felt a physical pain in his chest, a dull, heavy blow that made it hard to breathe. This was not a moment of weakness. This was an established intimacy. A separate life she had built in the shadows of their own. He finally opened the written report. Marcus had been thorough. The man was Gavin Reed, 32, a senior physical therapist at OHSU, the same hospital where Sophie worked. He was single, And the house in Lake Oswego was his. A search of their social media profiles showed they had been connected for over a year, but their public interactions were minimal. A few polite likes here and there. They were careful. They were discreet. The report included screenshots of text messages Marcus had managed to obtain through methods Adam didn't want to know about. They were filled with affectionate nicknames, plans for their next meeting, and complaints about having to work around Adam's teaching schedule. He closed the laptop and rested his head in his hands. He wanted to scream, to shatter something, to cry. But he did none of those things. A profound, chilling calm settled over him. The grief was real, but the path forward was now perfectly clear. He would not confront her yet. Not with anger. He would confront her with consequences. He opened his browser and searched for the top divorce attorneys in Portland. The next morning, Adam canceled his morning seminar, citing a sudden migraine. Instead, he sat in the plush leather chair of a downtown law office, across from a man named Richard Kellerman, an attorney with a reputation for being both sharp and merciless. Adam didn't speak of heartbreak or betrayal. He presented the situation as a set of facts. He slid the flash drive from the investigator across the polished mahogany desk. My wife has been engaged in a 3-month extramarital affair with a coworker, he stated, his voice level. Here is the evidence. All them. Kellerman reviewed the material in silence, his expression unreadable. He took notes, then looked up at Adam. Oregon is a no-fault divorce state, he explained. The infidelity won't legally affect the division of assets. However, this is leverage. It ensures a swift and uncontested process. It prevents her from making any claims of spousal support. It gives you complete control over the narrative. Control. That was the word Adam needed to hear. He left the office with a clear, sequential plan. It was time. He returned home that afternoon, hours before Sophie was due back. The apartment felt like a stage he was meticulously setting for the final act. He plugged the flash drive into the living room laptop, which sat on the coffee table. He created a slideshow of the most damning photos. Sophie and Gavin laughing, their hands intertwined. Them entering the house. The kiss in the car. He left it playing on a loop. The images cycling in a silent, brutal rhythm. Then he sat on the sofa, crossed his arms, and waited. At 6:30, he heard her key in the lock. Sophie walked in, a tired smile on her face. Hi, honey. Long day. You're home. She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes locking onto his expression. He was sitting perfectly still, his face a cold, unreadable mask. Her gaze drifted down to the laptop screen on the coffee table. The color drained from her face. She went pale, her bag slipping from her shoulder and landing on the floor with a soft thud. The photos were there, one after another. Indéniable. Irrefutable. Sit down, Sophie, Adam said. His voice was so calm, it scared even him. It was the voice he used in a lecture hall, devoid of all emotion. She stood frozen for a moment, her eyes wide with panic, as if she was contemplating running. But there was nowhere to run. Slowly, she walked to the armchair across from him, and sank into it, her hands shaking in her lap. Adam. She began, her voice a choked whisper. Shut up, he interrupted, the words low but sharp as glass. Just shut up, and listen. She closed her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes boring into hers. For 3 months, you have left this house 2 or 3 times a week, and driven to Lake Oswego, to sleep with Gavin Reed. For 3 months, you have come home, looked me in the eye, and lied about taking care of your sick aunt. I called her, by the way. She hasn't seen you since Christmas. Tears began to stream down her face, silent at first, then turning into ragged sobs. Adam, please. Let me explain. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Explain? Explain what? That you were sleeping with a coworker while I was teaching? That you invented an illness for your own aunt to use as an alibi? That you lied to my face every single day for 96 days? There's nothing to explain. There are only facts. I didn't plan for this to happen, she sobbed. It happened. We started talking at work. I was Lonely. Ember isn't. Lonely? Adam stood up, the anger finally breaking through his icy calm, but it was a controlled burn. You were lonely? Then why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you say, Adam, I'm unhappy. We need to fix something. But you didn't. You chose to lie. You chose to betray me. You chose to make a fool out of me. She stood too, reaching her hands out to him. A desperate gesture. I still love you, Adam. It was a mistake. I swear. 3 months is not a mistake, Sophie. Oh. He pushed her hands away, his touch like ice. 3 months is a choice. A project. You chose him. You chose to lie. It's over. No, please, we can fix this. I'll end it with him. I'll do anything, she begged, her voice cracking. He shook his head, his eyes red but completely dry. No. It's over. I've already spoken to a lawyer. His name is Richard Kellerman. You'll be hearing from him next week. He walked to the door and picked up the overnight bag he had packed earlier. I want you out of here by tomorrow afternoon, he said, his back to her. I'll be staying at a hotel. When I come back, I expect you and your things to be gone. The condo stays with me. You'll remember the down payment was entirely from my inheritance. He paused at the door, turning back one last time to deliver the final, calculated blow. Oh, and Sophie? Just so you know. It was Mr. Henderson in the lobby who told me. He said he saw you leaving with that fellow again. He thought he was a relative. He was just making small talk. He watched her face crumble. As she realized her elaborate deception was unraveled not by a grand discovery, but by a casual, mundane comment. The humiliation was absolute. He turned and walked out, pulling the door shut behind him with a firm, final click. In the days and weeks that followed, Adam acted not with the blind rage of a scorned husband, but with the cold, methodical precision of a demolition expert. He had identified the flawed structure of his life, and now he was dismantling it, piece by piece, ensuring nothing was left standing. His first act was to send a formal, registered letter to the Human Resources Department at OHSU. He attached copies of the investigator's most clinical evidence, the report, the photos with timestamps, the identification of Gavin Reed as a fellow employee. In the letter, he calmly explained that 2 of their employees were engaged in an extramarital affair, and that this behavior, built on a foundation of deceit, could potentially compromise the professional environment, especially given they worked in the same department. He framed it as a matter of institutional integrity. HR took the complaint seriously. Within 10 days, Gavin Reed was called into a meeting and presented with the evidence. He received a formal reprimand for unprofessional conduct, and was immediately reassigned to a different wing of the hospital, on a different shift. The affair, once a thrilling secret, became a piece of public administrative record. The humiliation within their professional community was swift and total. Adam's second act was to control the social narrative. He didn't hide the truth. When friends asked why Sophie had suddenly moved out, he didn't offer vague excuses. He told them the facts. His voice calm and steady. Sophie was having an affair for 3 months with a coworker. We're getting a divorce. It was simple, direct, and left no room for interpretation. There was no drama, no desperation, just the cold, hard truth. In the court of their shared social circle, the verdict was unanimous. Friends they had made as a couple sided with him, offering support and quiet condemnation for her actions. For weeks, Sophie tried to fight back. Her offensive came in the form of desperate, pleading texts and voicemails. She begged for a second chance. She swore Gavin was out of her life forever. She told him she had made the biggest mistake of her life, and that she would do anything to earn back his trust. Adam blocked her number. He instructed his lawyer to be his sole point of contact. The divorce moved forward with brutal efficiency. There were no children, no complex shared assets to fight over. The condo was sold, and as his lawyer had predicted, Sophie did not contest Adam's claim to the larger share of the proceeds, given his initial investment. She signed every paper without resistance. Within 6 months, the marriage was legally over. Just as Adam had predicted, Gavin Reed vanished from Sophie's life the moment the scandal broke. The man for whom she had risked everything wanted nothing to do with the fallout. He didn't want to be publicly tied to a messy divorce. When Sophie tried to contact him, he blocked her as well. The great, passionate love that had supposedly justified the destruction of her marriage evaporated at the first sign of real-world consequences. Adam heard through mutual acquaintances that Sophie's life had unraveled. She kept her job at OHSU, but the atmosphere was toxic. Coworkers whispered behind her back. She was isolated, a pariah in the place where her affair had begun. She had lost her husband, her reputation, and the man she had lost them for. She was left with nothing but the ash of the life she had burned to the ground. Adam felt nothing hearing this. No pity, no satisfaction, just a quiet, empty finality. The problem had been solved. A year later, Adam was living in Eugene, a 2-hour drive south of Portland. He had accepted a position at the University of Oregon, a move he framed as a professional opportunity, but which was, in reality, un escape. The memories in Portland were too sharp, too loud. He had rebuilt his life with the same methodical care he had used to dismantle his old one. He found a small, modern apartment downtown. He started therapy, approaching his own trauma as a subject to be analyzed and understood. He started running again, a habit he had abandoned during his marriage, pounding the pavement along the Willamette River each morning as the sun rose. And, to his own surprise, he began dating. Her name was Rose. She was a botanist at the university. A quiet, intelligent woman with a calm presence that he found soothing. They met at a faculty mixer. Their conversations were about her research into rare alpine flowers, and his theories on social stratification. It was easy, it was light. There was no heavy history, no unspoken betrayals. He was careful not to let it become serious too quickly, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of something like hope. He had learned lessons he never imagined he would need to learn. He learned that trust, once shattered so deliberately, cannot be pieced back together. He learned that acting with intelligence and quiet dignity, even in the crucible of pain, was a more powerful response than any act of rage. And he learned that starting over, while terrifying, was not just possible, but essential for survival. He didn't hate Sophie anymore. The anger had long since burned itself out, leaving behind only a distant sadness, like mourning someone who had died long ago. She was a ghost from a former life, a case study in poor choices and devastating consequences. One evening, he and Rose were having dinner at a restaurant overlooking the river. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He caught his reflection in the large glass window. He saw a man who looked older than 36, with a few more lines around his eyes. But he was smiling. It was a real smile, unforced and light, free of the immense weight he had carried for so long. In that moment, he knew he had finally crossed over to the other side. The betrayal no longer defined him. It was a part of his history, a scar that had faded, but it was not the sum of who he was. "The world keeps turning," he said quietly, more to himself than to Rose. She looked at him, a question in her eyes. He just smiled back. He was Adam Cole, a professor, Arona, a man who had loved, lost, Zofait, and had, against all odds, found himself again. Life went on, and he was doing just fine. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next.